Doctor stood in her office on the medical station orbiting Prime, staring at the brain scans of her patient. Every line glowed green. Every chemical level sat exactly where it should be. By every measure known to galactic medicine, Commander or should be healthy, functional, happy even. Yet the decorated war veteran sat in her waiting room, unable to sleep for the fourth month in a row, unable to touch his children without flinching, unable to feel anything except a hollow emptiness that terrified him more than combat ever had. She had tried everything. The neural restructuring that fixed 97% of psychological damage, the chemical balancing that adjusted neurotransmitters to perfect levels, the memory dampening that should have softened the sharp edges of his traumatic experiences. All of it worked exactly as designed. His brain functioned flawlessly, but or was still broken in ways her instruments couldn't measure. "I don't understand," she told her colleague Dr. Morpheus, a crystalline being whose species had conquered mental illness 2,000 years ago. "The treatment is perfect. Why isn't he better?" Morpheus hummed, a sound like wind through caves. "Perhaps perfect treatment for the brain is not treatment for the mind." Wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because or wasn't her only failing patient. Across the Galactic Union, the numbers told a story that every doctor feared to speak aloud. Suicide rates had tripled in the last decade across 17 different species. Rehabilitation facilities overflowed with patients whose scans showed complete recovery but whose lives remained shattered. Beings who should be cured wandered through their days like ghosts, chemically balanced but spiritually dead. The Galactic Health Council called an emergency session. Attended via hologram, watching hundreds of the galaxy's finest medical minds flicker into existence around the Grand Chamber. The statistics scrolled across the central display, each number worse than the last. Depression, anxiety, trauma-related disorders, all climbing despite treatments that grew more sophisticated each year. "We are losing them," said Counselor, his 6 arms gesturing at the data. "We fix their bodies, balance their chemistry, restructure their neural pathways. They should recover. Why don't they recover?" The Council's AI, a vast intelligence that processed medical data from 1 trillion beings, spoke in its calm, emotionless voice. "Insufficient data. The correlation between treatment success and patient suffering does not compute. All treated individuals show optimal brain function, yet 73% report continued distress." A neurologist stood, her scales rippling with frustration. "We've abandoned emotion-based treatments because they were inefficient. Logic-based works faster, cleaner, more reliably. We cannot return to primitive methods." "Then what do you suggest?" Morpheus asked. "We watch them die with perfectly balanced brains." The chamber fell silent. 200 of the galaxy's greatest medical minds, and not one had an answer. That's when Dr. Sarah raised her hand. She sat in the far corner of the chamber, representing Earth's small medical delegation. Most species barely noticed the humans. They were newcomers to the Galactic Union, their medical technology primitive compared to species that had conquered disease ago, but stood anyway, her voice steady. "I may have a suggestion," she said. The chamber turned to look at her, could see the skepticism in every gesture, every shift of posture. What could humans possibly offer? "On Earth," continued, "we have similar problems. Veterans who come home from war with perfect bodies but broken spirits. People who survive trauma and can't remember why life matters anymore. We've learned that sometimes the brain working correctly isn't enough. Sometimes people need something else." "Such as?" asked, his tone dismissive. "They need to talk about it," said simply. "They need someone to listen. They need to tell their story and have someone understand. We call it therapy." The chamber erupted. Laughter, disbelief, outrage, talk, primitive emotional ventilation. The galaxy had abandoned such methods 3,000 years ago when they discovered neural restructuring. Talking didn't fix broken neural pathways. It didn't balance serotonin levels. It was inefficient, imprecise, and subjective. but didn't laugh. She remembered something from 5 years ago during a cultural exchange program. She had observed a human veteran, a soldier named who had seen combat as brutal as anything or had experienced, had arrived at the Earth medical facility barely functional. PTSD, the humans called it, post-traumatic stress disorder. Had expected to see advanced treatment. Instead, she watched sit in a simple room with a human counselor who did nothing but listen. Week after week talked, he cried, he raged, he remembered, and slowly, impossibly, he healed. Not because his brain chemistry changed, but because something else did. Something instruments couldn't measure. She stood abruptly. I want to see it. The chamber quieted, looked at her with surprise. I want to see these human methods, said. If there's even a chance they could help, we must investigate. We're losing patients, all of us. Every day, we have nothing to lose by looking. Considered this. Finally, he nodded. Very well, Doctor, you will lead a delegation to Earth, observe their methods, report back. If there is anything of value, we will consider it. 3 weeks later, stood on Earth's surface for the first time, breathing air that tasted strange and watching a yellow sun that seemed too small in the sky. She had brought a team of 12 specialists from across the galaxy, the best neurologists, psychiatrists, and medical researchers the Union could offer. They came expecting to find hidden technology, some trick the humans hadn't revealed, advanced scanning equipment, genetic modifications, something that would explain their success. Met them at the landing pad, smiling warmly. Welcome to Earth. I hope you're ready to have everything you know about healing challenged. We're ready to observe your techniques, said Dr. Kelvin, who specialized in neural mapping. Show us your equipment. Smile widened. Follow me. She led them to a building at the edge of the city. It looked ordinary, nothing special about its architecture or design. Inside, the corridors were quiet, painted in soft colors. Stopped at a door and gestured for them to look through the observation window. Inside sat 2 humans. One was a counselor, the other a patient. They sat in comfortable chairs facing each other. Between them sat a small table with a box of tissues. Nothing else. No scanners, no neural interface equipment, no chemical dispensers. This is it, Kelvin asked, incredulous. This is your advanced treatment. Watch, said softly. The patient was crying, talking about a car accident that had killed her daughter. The counselor didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, didn't reach for any medical equipment. She just listened, completely, utterly present. When the patient finished, the counselor spoke quietly, validating the mother's pain, helping her understand that her grief was natural, that her guilt made sense given what she'd experienced. This is inefficient, Kelvin muttered. You could dampen the pain receptors, restructure the memory pathways, balance her neurochemistry. This would take weeks or months. Our methods work in days. Your methods fix the brain, said, but do they heal the person? Pressed closer to the window. Something was happening in that room, something her scientific training struggled to quantify. The patient's posture changed as she talked. The tension in her shoulders eased. Her breathing steadied. Not because of any external intervention, but because someone was truly hearing her pain, acknowledging it, making space for it. I don't understand, whispered. What is she doing? She's bearing witness, said. She's helping that mother make meaning from her suffering. She's showing her that her pain matters, that her love for her daughter matters, that her story deserves to be told and heard. Humans learned something a long time ago. We learned that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about honoring what hurts. Over the next several days, the delegation observed dozens of sessions. Individual therapy, group therapy, family counseling, trauma processing. They watched humans use techniques with strange names: cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization, narrative therapy, mindfulness practices. None of it made sense to species that had evolved beyond messy emotions. But the results were undeniable. They watched a veteran with PTSD learn to reframe his traumatic memories, not by erasing them, but by changing how he related to them. They observed a support group where strangers shared their struggles and found strength in community. They saw a couple on the edge of separation learn to communicate, to truly hear each other, to rebuild connection. This should not work, Kelvin insisted. It's too imprecise, too dependent on individual variables, too slow. Yet it did work. Patient after patient improved, not because their brains were fixed, but because something deeper was addressed. On the final day, sat with the delegation in a conference room. I know this seems primitive to you, she said. You have technology we can barely dream of, but humans learn something through our limitations. We learned that consciousness isn't just biology, it's story, it's meaning, it's connection. You can have a perfectly functioning brain and still feel dead inside because being alive isn't just about neural pathways firing correctly. It's about mattering, about being seen, about your pain being acknowledged as real and valid. Thought of Orr, sitting in her office with perfect brain scans and dead eyes. She thought of all the patients across the galaxy, chemically balanced but spiritually shattered. She thought of everything she'd observed here, these simple rooms with simple chairs where humans did the most extraordinary thing. They truly saw each other's suffering. Teach us, she said quietly, teach us everything. Doctor returned to her practice 3 months later, her head full of human techniques that still felt strange and uncomfortable. She had trained in active listening, empathy, validation, something the humans called the therapeutic alliance. She had learned to sit with discomfort instead of immediately solving it, to ask questions instead of providing answers, to bear witness instead of fixing. Her colleagues thought she'd lost her mind. Dr. Morpheus visited her office concerned. You're using human methods. You're one of our finest psychiatrists. Why abandon proven techniques for primitive talk therapy? Because my proven techniques aren't working, she said simply. Watch. She invited him to observe her next session with Commander Orr. The veteran entered, looking as haunted as always despite his perfect neural scans. But this time, didn't reach for her medical equipment. She simply gestured to the chair across from her. Tell me about the worst day, she said gently. Not the medical details. Tell me what it felt like, what you saw, what you lost. Or stared at her. I don't understand. Don't you want to run more scans? No, I want to hear your story. I want to understand what you carry. Will you tell me? For a long moment, Orr said nothing. Then slowly, he began to talk. About the mission that went wrong. About the soldiers under his command who didn't come home. About the choice he'd made that saved 100 lives but cost 20 others. About the guilt that ate at him every moment, the feeling that he didn't deserve to be alive when they were dead. Didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions or try to fix him. She just listened, completely present, letting Orr speak his truth for the first time since the incident. When he finally finished, tears streaming down his face, she spoke softly. That sounds unbearable. You carry that every day. Every moment, he whispered. I'm so sorry. That weight you carry, that guilt, it makes sense given what happened. You made an impossible choice. You saved lives, and you lost people you cared about. Both things are true. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're responding exactly as any being with a heart would respond. Something shifted in Orr's expression. Not a cure, not a sudden healing, but the tiniest loosening of the vice around his spirit. Someone had heard him. Someone understood. Someone acknowledged that his pain made sense. Behind the observation window, Morpheus watched in silence. Over the following weeks, other doctors began asking questions. What were these human techniques? Could they really help where advanced medicine failed? Started teaching small workshops, demonstrating active listening and empathy. Most colleagues remained skeptical, but a few tried it with their most difficult patients, the ones who should be cured but weren't. The results spread like ripples across water. A psychiatrist helped a patient process grief over a lost parent, something their species typically handled with memory suppression. Instead of suppressing the memories, she helped the patient honor them, create meaning from them. The patient reported feeling connected to their parent in a way memory suppression had prevented. A counselor started a support group for veterans. They sat in a circle, these soldiers from different campaigns, different worlds, and shared their stories. They found kinship in their pain, strength in being understood by others who knew what war really cost. Suicide rates among veterans in that district dropped by 40%. Word reached the Galactic Health Council. Counselor contacted personally. "We're seeing unusual results from your district. Patient satisfaction has increased. Recovery rates have improved. What are you doing differently?" "I'm using human methods," said, "and they work." "That's impossible. Talk therapy is primitive. It can't be more effective than neural restructuring." "It's not more effective," explained. "It's differently effective. Neural restructuring fixes the brain. Therapy heals the being. We need both." The humans understood something we forgot. Consciousness isn't just biology. It's experience, meaning, connection. You can have a perfectly functioning brain and still be lost if your suffering has no witness, no validation, no place in your story. Was silent for a long moment. "Send me your training materials, all of them." The request came officially 2 weeks later. The Galactic Health Council wanted a full presentation on human psychological methods. They wanted to understand how something so simple could succeed where advanced technology failed. Doctor was invited to present alongside. The chamber, filled with doctors, researchers, and medical professionals from across the galaxy, stood before them calm and steady. "You've mastered the biology of the brain," she said, "but you've forgotten the psychology of the soul. You can fix neurons, but can you heal hearts? You can balance chemicals, but can you create meaning? You can restructure memories, but can you help someone integrate their pain into their story in a way that allows them to grow?" She showed them videos, real patients, real sessions, a trauma survivor learning to feel safe in her body again through somatic therapy, a widower finding meaning in his grief through narrative therapy, a child learning to regulate overwhelming emotions through play therapy. Simple techniques, no advanced technology, just humans helping humans remember how to be whole. "We're not saying abandon your methods," continued. "We're saying combine them with ours. Fix the brain and heal the being. Use your technology to address the biological damage and use our techniques to address the psychological wounds. Because healing isn't just about removing symptoms. It's about helping people remember who they are, what they've survived, and why their life matters." The vote was unanimous. Human psychological methods would be integrated into standard galactic medical training. Universities across the Union would teach therapy techniques alongside neural restructuring. Earth's Counseling Institute would become a training center for therapists from every species. The transformation began immediately. Within a year, therapy centers opened on 100 worlds. Beings who had suffered for years with perfect brain chemistry finally found relief through simple human techniques: talking, being heard, making meaning from pain. But the real test came when the colony experienced catastrophe. A solar flare destroyed their atmosphere. Millions evacuated, but millions more died. The survivors arrived at refugee stations traumatized, devastated, unable to process what they'd lost. Medicine treated the physical injuries and the acute psychological damage. Neural restructuring prevented immediate breakdown. But the grief remained. The loss remained. The survivors functioned but didn't live. They existed in a gray fog, going through motions, chemically balanced but spiritually shattered. That's when the human-trained grief counselors arrived. They set up simple spaces where could gather and talk. At first, the survivors didn't understand. Talk about what? Their planet was gone. Their loved ones were dead. What good would talking do? But slowly they came. They sat in circles and spoke about what they'd lost. Their homes, their families, their entire way of life. The counselors didn't try to fix it or make it better. They just bore witness. They acknowledged the magnitude of the loss. They helped them understand that their grief was appropriate, that their pain honored what they'd loved, that their memories mattered. Something remarkable happened. They began to heal. Not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. They created memorial services to honor their dead. They formed support groups to help each other through the worst days. They started rebuilding not just their lives but their sense of meaning and purpose. The Galactic Health Council studied the recovery extensively. The data was clear. Survivors who received both medical treatment and grief counseling showed significantly better long-term outcomes than those who received medical treatment alone. They had lower rates of depression, anxiety, and complicated grief. They reported higher life satisfaction and stronger social connections. It works, admitted in an official report. These human methods actually work. 5 years after Doctor first traveled to Earth, she stood at the podium of the Pangalactic Mental Health Summit. 10,000 attendees filled the Grand Hall, representing 200 species from across the Union. She looked out at them, remembering the skepticism, the dismissal, the certainty that human methods were too primitive to help. "We were wrong," she began, "for we focused on the brain and forgot about the being. We treated consciousness as if it were only biology, as if fixing neurons was the same as healing souls. We were wrong." She gestured to the screen behind her, showing the data. Suicide rates had dropped by 62% across the species using integrated treatment. Recovery rates for trauma had improved by 74%. Patient satisfaction scores had tripled. Rehabilitation success rates were at historic highs. "The humans taught us something we'd forgotten," continued. "They taught us that healing requires more than fixing what's broken. It requires honoring what hurts. It requires bearing witness to suffering, helping beings make meaning from pain, creating space for emotions that logic cannot solve." She told them about Orr, who after 2 years of integrated treatment had reconnected with his children and returned to work. Not because his memories were erased or his guilt removed, but because he'd learned to carry his experience as part of his story rather than a weight that crushed him. She told them about the survivors who created a new culture from their grief, honoring what they'd lost while building something new. She told them about the countless patients across the galaxy who had been chemically balanced but spiritually dead, now living full lives because someone had taken the time to truly see their pain. "We have the technology to fix brains," said, "but humans taught us that a fixed brain isn't the same as a healed being. They showed us that our greatest therapeutic tool isn't our scanners or our chemicals or our neural restructuring equipment. It's presence, it's empathy. It's the willingness to sit with someone in their pain and say, 'You're not alone. I see you. Your story matters.'" She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, so many different species united by a common purpose: healing. Humans are remarkable not because of their technology, which lags behind ours by centuries. They're remarkable because they never forgot something we lost in our rush toward efficiency. They never forgot that beings aren't just biological machines to be repaired. We're conscious creatures who need meaning, connection, and understanding. We need our pain to be witnessed and validated. We need to feel that our struggles matter, that our stories deserve to be told. Doctor sat in the front row, smiling quietly, gestured to her. "Doctor once told me that humans learned these methods through their limitations. They couldn't fix the brain perfectly, so they learned to heal the being instead. They couldn't erase pain, so they learned to transform it into meaning. They couldn't make trauma disappear, so they learned to help people integrate it into their stories in ways that allowed growth rather than destruction." Pulled up the final slide, showing Earth's small blue sphere against the darkness of space. Humanity's greatest export to the galaxy isn't their innovation or their adaptability or their stubborn refusal to quit. It's this: the understanding that healing happens not in isolation but in connection. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply sit with someone in their suffering and acknowledge it as real. That consciousness is more than neurons firing. That life is more than biological function. That being whole requires more than being fixed. She looked directly at the audience, her voice strong and clear. We spent treating the brain while humans learned to heal the soul. They reminded us of something we'd forgotten in our advancement, that we are not just our biology. We are our stories, our connections, our meanings. And when we suffer, we don't just need our chemistry balanced. We need our humanity acknowledged. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with a few beings and spread through the hall like a wave, species after species joining in. They were applauding not just words, but the truth they represented. The truth that humans, with their short lives and fragile bodies, had taught the galaxy something profound. After the summit returned to her practice, Commander Orr was waiting in her office, not as a patient but as a visitor. He had completed his treatment and now worked as a peer counselor, helping other veterans process their trauma. He smiled when he saw her, something that had seemed impossible 5 years ago. "I heard your speech," he said. "It was good." "I told them about you," replied, "about how you healed." "I didn't heal because you fixed me," Orr said quietly. "I healed because you saw me, because you let me tell my story and made me feel like it mattered, like I mattered. That's what saved me, not the scans or the treatments. You, listening, understanding, being there." Felt emotion well up, something she once would have considered unprofessional. Now she recognized it as the appropriate response to a moment of genuine connection. "The humans taught me that," she said. "They taught me how to be present, how to honor pain instead of just eliminating it, how to help beings create meaning from suffering." Or nodded. "Then I guess we owe them our lives, a lot of us do." That evening, sat in her apartment and thought about the journey. From the desperate council meeting where no one had answers, to Earth where humans showed them a different way, to now, where therapy centers existed on hundreds of worlds and thousands of beings trained in techniques humans had developed through necessity. She thought about all the patients she'd lost before learning these methods, beings she'd treated perfectly according to every medical standard but who had slipped away anyway because their suffering had no witness. She thought about all the beings she'd helped since, not by fixing them but by seeing them, by making space for their pain, by helping them weave their trauma into their stories in ways that allowed them to keep living. Humanity had given the galaxy an incredible gift. Not technology or resources or scientific breakthroughs, but something far more valuable. The reminder that consciousness is sacred, that suffering deserves acknowledgement, that healing requires more than efficiency. They had reminded the galaxy that sometimes the most advanced medicine isn't a medicine at all. It's simply being present with another being and saying, "I see your pain, it's real, it matters, you matter. Tell me your story and I will bear witness." That was humanity's legacy. Not conquest or innovation, but compassion. The understanding that healing happens not through fixing but through connection. That we save each other not with technology but with presence, empathy, and the willingness to sit with suffering until it transforms into meaning. Looked up at the stars, knowing that on Earth, humans were still doing what they'd always done. Sitting with each other's pain, bearing witness to each other's stories, healing each other through the simple, profound act of being truly seen. The galaxy was learning. Finally, after of advancement, they were learning the most important lesson of all, the one humans had known all along. That we're not machines to be repaired. We're beings to be honored, heard, and healed through connection. And that makes all the difference.